Hey guys, Drifter here. It's about a week until Halloween, which means it's time for my annual Halloween movie guide. I've done this 3 years running, and so far it seems like most of you have enjoyed it. This year, I was kind of thinking should do a theme. I should do like funny, scary movies, or like slasher films, or I almost settled on truly horrifying, just painfully like grotesque, make you feel dirty, need to take a shower movies. But then I thought, you know what? That's just going to be unappealing. Instead, this year, let's talk about films that could use a little bit of extra love. Some scary movies that are fantastic that came out but didn't quite go mainstream, that didn't get enough attention. So I've curated a list here for you of honestly mostly independent films that are just downright fantastic that you can break out on Halloween. I've got everything from X-rated to PG-13 to comedy to true horror, so you can kind of pick and show and impress your friends. And of course, all the links to all the films and Netflix or wherever they're at are down here below in the description. Without any further ado, let's get started with film number 1 this year, which is Housebound. Housebound is a New Zealand horror comedy film that's still a scary movie in its own right, but maintains the ability to be lighthearted. I don't believe it has an American rating, but if it were to be rated in America, it would be on the higher end of PG-13 or on the lower end of R-rated. This movie for me was just insanely fun to watch, and the plot is that a delinquent youth gets arrested trying to rob an ATM, and she ends up being sentenced to house arrest with her family, who she hates and doesn't get along with at all. She had actually run away from the family. This house arrest gets worse because her mother's trying to reconnect and make amends and be a good mom, but it just comes off as annoying. And then it gets worse again when her mother, who is not the most intelligent of person, calls into a radio show to complain about the house being haunted and complains about ghosts and accidentally reveals her identity, so her delinquent friends get to make fun of her for having a crazy mom. Then, when she's about to run away, a disembodied hand comes out of nowhere and touches the young girl before disappearing. She panics, she freaks out, and she calls her parole officer, who she thinks that maybe she can convince to be let off early or be transferred somewhere else or just go to jail because she hates her mom. And unfortunately, her parole officer is a huge ghost hunter and ghost fan, and he shows up with all his little like ghost equipment to check the house and see what's going on. But now her mother doesn't believe in ghosts because it's inconvenient for her, and her and the parole officer are arguing with each other. It causes a big mess in her life, and this is mostly lighthearted and not much in the scary until the state gets involved. And then a state psychologist shows up to the home to investigate the mental health of the person on parole. At the same time, her mother reveals that the house that she grew up in, the house where they're at now, used to be a home for troubled youths, and there were several murders that occurred in this sort of halfway home for troubled youths. And the girl begins to try and solve a decade-old murder mystery and figure out who and what the ghost is. At the same time, the state is trying to assess her mental health. And it goes off the rails and gets violent and crazy and fun near the end. But overall, a fantastic movie. And I think it's good. It's a pretty good family kind of scary movie. And if you know your kids are mature enough, probably not for like really little kids, but anywhere 12, 13 plus, they should really enjoy it. Number 2 today is definitely not a film for kids. It's called The Void. This is a relatively new movie. I think it was 2016, 2015, if I'm not mistaken. And it's kind of a hard film for me to recommend to anybody because only half of this movie is good. And the half of this movie that's good is downright amazing, but the other half is rough. The good half, and the trailer, which is probably playing in some capacity either before or after my talking or even during it, I haven't edited this yet, so I don't know, makes it look like a spiritual successor to John Carpenter's The Thing. It feels like this gross, violent, like 80s horror movie with latex and practical effects and fun kind of just run and survive without a lot of plot going on. Unfortunately, that's only the second half of the movie. The first half of the movie is painfully bad. I almost gave up on it. So the first half, very briefly, a small town cop picks up some people and needs to take them to another small town hospital that's set to close down the very next day. The nurse at the hospital is his former wife, and they broke up for a reason, a very plot-centric reason to this movie. And there's a few essential staff there and a few stragglers and patients, but overall very, very minimal staff, small cast, because it's kind of a small budget, right? But as soon as they arrive, a cult shows up, surrounds the hospital, and cuts off the power. There's some sort of weird monster in the hospital that is infecting anything that touches it, like the Thing from John Carpenter, and there's these father and son hunters that show up trying to kill the Thing, and a pregnant woman who may or may not be giving birth to the Antichrist. But it's all like really poorly done, and I kind of hated it, and I almost gave up on this movie. Until the halfway point, where the main character, the cop, and some of the others decide to go into the basement of the hospital to see if maybe there's a window or a path or an additional exit or some other way they can sneak out and get away from the cult. And then the movie just immediately takes a huge uptick in quality. It becomes scary, violent, chaotic, like literally all hell breaks loose. And it turns into this super awesome movie with zombies and monsters and ancient gods and violence and people, desperate to survive, and the real intentions of all the characters that seemed random and set up and sort of nonsensical before are finally revealed. And it turns into a super good movie in that last half, which is like when you look at the posters of the movie, which just whoever made posters for this movie, they should get a permanent job somewhere at a big studio because they really oversold it. They're all from the second half. So if you can, the second half is also very Lovecraftian if you're into Lovecraft kind of stuff. If you can sit through the first half of this movie and make it to that hump, like that halfway point, the payoff is 100% there. Though I do warn you, it is super duper insanely gory and violent and definitely not good for a mixed audience. Moving along, let's talk about number 3 today, which is Innkeepers. This is pretty much the polar opposite of The Void. This is a movie that focuses on tension and characters and very little on jump scares or violence or effects or anything like that. And I think it's very good. This one, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is also rated PG-13, so it's a pretty good, acceptable-ish sort of family film for family scary. And the plot is 2 employees at an old hotel set to close very soon are stuck there, and they're bored as devil. They're getting paid minimum wage, they have nothing to do, there's no guest, and the guy kind of likes the girl, but he can't admit it. And then they discover that they're both secret ghost hunting enthusiasts. They both love those like cheesy HGTV or Travel Channel paranormal shows, and they have their little EMP meters, and they're both big ghost fans. And the hotel that they're in just happens to be historically and famously haunted by this bride who killed herself in the 1800s. So since there's no guest, they decide to go ghost hunting. They've got nothing else to do, and see if they can find the, blood-splattered bride and find the ghost and maybe make their own, like, ghost documentary. And it's kind of a way for this guy to kind of hit on the girl and for the girl to find herself because she's sick of minimum wage jobs. But then 2 unexpected guests show up. One of them I'm not going to talk too much about because it's relevant to the plot. Spoiler plot, more accurately. And the other one is a former actress who is now a psychic and warns the girl not to go into the basement no matter what. As the 2 continue their ghost hunting in this old spooky hotel, they begin to find things are kind of off, and that maybe there really is a real ghost and a real threat, and it's really malevolent and something is wrong here. It's a very slow-paced film, but it's super well acted. It's good to watch. You end up really caring about the people because they feel really real, and it has a big payoff at the end. It feels very complete, very closed, and I think it's a quality film. Moving along to number 4 today, let's talk about The Ritual. This is one that you can definitely find on Netflix because I don't think it was a Netflix original, but I do believe Netflix licensed this one. On its outset, it looks like a very generic Lost in the Woods movie. 4 friends go into the woods and then spooky things happen. It looks like that, but it's so much more than that. The plot is 4 friends go into the wilderness in Norway, Sweden, Finland, Scandinavia land somewhere. It's a year after one of their friends is murdered. So it used to be 5 friends, now it's 4 friends, and one of the other friends hid and watched the 5th one being murdered because he was a coward, because he didn't want to confront the people that were robbing him in a store and get shot himself, etc., etc. So they're going on this to try to mend their friendship, and they start seeing these ancient runes carved into trees, and they find a spooky cabin with this weird sort of hay structure or effigy built into it, and one of them twists his ankle and gets hurt, and then they start hearing and seeing things and having terrible dreams. And it's kind of like standard, like what you would expect from, oh, you know, a couple of guys lost in the woods, super spooky things happen, somebody disappears in the night and then shows up later confused, blah, blah, blah. Pretty standard fare. Except that most of the characters make truly rational decisions. They're all well-written characters. They're all very smart, competent, capable people that don't really make a lot of stupid mistakes. And you think that this is a ghost movie, right? That they're going into the spooky woods and there's a witch and it's haunted. But then you see a creature. A very creepy reveal, by the way, too. And a small spoiler, you will see quite a lot of creature in this movie, but I'm not going to show it here in this guide because I think that's a spoiler. But the creature continues to stalk them in the woods as they try to escape, and it's difficult to escape while being hunted and confused, and you have a friend with a bum leg. But the creature seems to be both supernatural and physical. It exists in both places at the same time, so it's got a big toolkit on how to mess with people. And the primary plot is about the friend who hid and watched his other friend be murdered, now has to overcome his cowardice and try to save his other friends' lives. And the ending, about the last 30, you kind of have this movie figured, right? And then about the last 30 minutes, there's a huge turnaround. I wouldn't say it's a twist, because that's not fair. It was kind of predicted. But it goes off the rails, like violence, action, drama, horror, gore, everything just ramps up 5 times what it was. Ending was super fun. The Ritual's on Netflix, and I would say it's definitely worth a Halloween watch. Moving on to number 5 today, I want to talk about Deathgasm, yet another New Zealand horror comedy. We've got 2 of those today. This time, it's a super lowbrow, slapstick, all jokes and butts and boobs and gore, sort of lowest common denominator humor. It is, and by the way, did I mention it's gore? It's very, very gory. The plot of Deathgasm is a young metalhead's mom is hospitalized, and he has to go live with his very normal, Christian, upstanding, nice guy uncle in a small town that's super podunk and boring and has nothing that a metalhead would like. His stepbrother's a dickhead. His stepfather keeps trying to, cousin is a dickhead. His uncle keeps trying to get him to go to church, and he's having a hard time. He hates it there, he struggles at school, but he meets another metalhead friend, and they go do delinquent things, they do graffiti, they try to make music videos and hang out and smoke pot and just kind of do punk stuff. The pretty blonde cheerleader girl at the school ends up really liking the metalhead just because he's so different than all the boring boys around there that aren't too different from each other. He's just something radically different, so she gets into him. But then his new best friend, the other metalhead, gets in the way, and it turns into a love triangle. And about the time this happens, the 2 of them had this brilliant idea to go and steal a piece of sheet music from a burned down house. Now, this house used to belong to a famous, heavy metal artist who died in a plane crash, and then his house caught on fire. And they find this sheet music sealed in a box because they were going to his house to pray to Satan or whatever. They decide to play this sheet music, and it turns into being satanic music, and they accidentally summon demons and zombies, and a cult shows up, and all sorts of just crazy nonsense for about the last almost hour of the movie. Everything, you got your setup in the 30 minutes, and then an hour of just bananas. And the rest of the movie is basically metalheads versus demons. You've got the guy, his girl, his friend, a few of their associated friends, and a few other people that try to help along the way, all fighting various demons and zombies and crazy stuff. And it's pretty lighthearted. It's gory and violent, but more in a Monty Python kind of way, and it's fun. But I do admit that near the very end, like the last 5 minutes, it has a tonal shift and gets kind of dark and dour, and then picks back up again. So a little bit of a mixed ending there. It's a super cheap movie, probably overall the worst. Like, if I were a movie critic, this would definitely have to get the lowest rating of all the movies on this list. But it's a very fun film to watch in a group. If you have a group of people that like to drink or smoke pot and watch silly movies, if it's a big group of mixed people, and you don't want to show them something serious, you just want to show them something funny, something they can laugh at, definitely Deathgasm. That's the way to go. Moving along to number 6 today, I want to talk about The Endless. This is probably the overall best movie on the list this year, and it's one of the best movies that I've seen this year, period. I watched it about 3 or 4 weeks ago now, and it's really a top tier movie. It's kind of a sci-fi horror, and it's right up there with Annihilation, in my opinion. The basic plot is that 2 brothers were raised in a cult after their parents died in a car accident. They escaped the cult some time ago in their very early adulthood, but they've had a very difficult time adapting to the rest of society and living in Los Angeles and holding down a job, and they struggle a lot, and there's kind of a bad dynamic going on between the two brothers. They get a videotape from the cult, and just kind of out of the blue, it's kind of random, and it gets one of the brothers thinking, maybe we should go back, for closure. The other one reluctantly agrees to do that, and they go back to visit the cult, and oddly they're, instead of, being ostracized or shamed, they're immediately accepted, and they kind of try to be nice and pull them back in. And that's when the two brothers start to notice some small magical things happening, some impossibilities. They play this game where they throw a rope in the air and it floats, and something in the air pulls on the rope. A couple of floating objects, mirrored skies, impossible things, little time warps, just little things that are off, little things that you can do with no budget for special effects. It's a super, super cheap, low budget movie. But they start to think maybe there was more to this cult than meets the eye. Maybe there was something going on here, that maybe there was a reason that all these people are here. Maybe they're not just here at random. Maybe there's some real magic, and maybe there is actually a real God, because a lot of these people do worship some omnipotent God that's around them. However, things start getting more dangerous and more violent. Not all of the members are happy with their new guest or with their god, or their god may not be happy with the new guest either. I don't want to spoil a whole lot from this movie. I do want to let you know it's pretty low budget, so don't be expecting a lot of crazy explosions and action. But they do a lot with their low budget, and most of the plot focuses on the two brothers themselves and their dynamic and how that plays out and how they survive together. It does get very intense and cool near the end. It's also a very Lovecraftian film, and it's just a super good movie. There's a couple of little flaws with it if I wanted to nitpick about it, but I was overall super happy with the Endless, and I was thinking about it 3 days later still, and I would highly recommend it. This one I believe is also on Netflix. Finally today, I want to recommend Session 9. This is going to be by far the slowest paced film on the list, and it's also an extremely slow burn horror movie, if you're familiar with those. That's the kind of one that sinks in with you much, much later on, that it'd take a day or 2 or 3 to really kind of fully process in your brain. The plot of this one is that an old insane asylum is being renovated into a new something, a new clubhouse, a new hotel, a new something. It's just being gutted and renovated. However, there's a whole buttload of old asbestos that needs to be removed. So they call in a group of people who are, they are asbestos removal people, but they're kind of poor and desperate because there's not that much asbestos to remove anymore. And even though it's a big job that they can barely handle and it's dangerous, they just agree and they go in and start removing the asbestos. It's kind of got a fun duality between the very real threat of asbestos poisoning and the ghosts and spooky things going on there. But all of the workers keep finding old tapes and old notebooks and little things from the former, we'll call them residents or guests of the insane asylum, and one of them finds a stash of rare coins, enough to solve all of his financial problems, and he plans to come back later and to steal the coins, but when he does come back, he finds something far worse. Most of the characters do slowly start losing their minds in this movie. It's a little bit of a, is it a ghost real? Is it a whodunit? But it is really slow paced. Super duper slow paced. There's a bit of a payoff at the end, but it's a super slow burn kind of movie. So don't go in with super high expectations. But as a movie guy, as a horror movie buff, I really loved it. Guys, that is all for this year's horror movie guide and my recommendations. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something useful. I hope that you check out some of these films that are all linked down there below. Drifter out.